Hello, I'm Brian Costello, and welcome to the Teacher's Journey podcast, where we talk with some of the best educators around about learning and life as they share the stories that made them the educators they are today. All right, and thank you all so much for joining us on this journey. My guest tonight is the one and only amazing Jennifer Casa Todd, author of the book Social Media, and teacher librarian from Cardinal Carter Catholic High School in Aurora, Ontario. I just said I wasn't going to mess that up, and definitely messed it up anyway. I'm really excited to have Jennifer with me today to talk a little bit more and share her story of how she got to be where she is today. So welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Brian.
Absolutely. I'm thrilled that you were able to join me tonight. So, Jennifer, tell me a little bit about when you realized that you wanted to go into education.
So I have one of those typical stories where I was completely inspired by a teacher. His name was Jim Stewart, and he would pace I guess we were all sitting in rows at the time, but he would walk around and he was so passionate about literature, and his passion was infectious. So I remember thinking to myself, I would love to inspire people to love reading and love literature as much as Mr. Stewart is inspiring me. And that was grade 11. And I pretty much kind of followed him. When I was in Teachers College, I went into his classroom. And then the first few years I was actually at his school, and he was my department head. And I remember not even being able to say his first name, Jim. I always called him Mr. Stewart. And then sometimes I never called him anything at all. And other times I would say, if you've watched Dead Poet Society, you know how inspirational that is for English teachers. So I would sometimes call him, "Oh, Captain, my Captain," just so I wouldn't have to call him Jim. But it was really him. It was a love and passion for literature. And I certainly, I think it inspired a spark in me, and I wanted to do the same.
That's fantastic. That really is. It's a common theme that you hear a lot with teachers, is they had that those teachers that inspire them, or sometimes it's one person who really showed them that they could be that inspiring to others. And I love hearing those stories though, because I loved all my teachers, but at the same time was like, nope, not going to be a teacher. Definitely not going to do that. Not going to do it. No chance on earth I will be a teacher. And lo and behold,
and here you are.
Here I am. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's just I always love hearing those stories, and the more I hear them, the more I think to myself, I had all these inspiring teachers, and I just never even bothered to notice.
Well, it's interesting because when I started junior kindergarten, I don't know if do you have junior kindergarten there? So when I started junior kindergarten, I did not speak a word of English. And when they brought in the translators, they didn't know what I was saying because I was speaking a regional dialect of Italian, because my grandmother, my nonna, had raised me. And so my first few years, I was way behind in the reading groups. They thought I had an intellectual disability because I was, of course, an English language learner, which they didn't recognize at the time. So many of my experiences with teachers was the actual opposite, that I wasn't going to amount to very much. And I think that in grade 11, when, Mr. Stewart not only inspired me, but also believed in me and my potential, that's when I sort of thought, okay, you know what? I don't want to be the kind of teacher that has put me down for all these years. I want to be that kind of teacher, the kind of teacher that inspires. So I think in some ways my story is a little bit different because of my rough start.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and it's one of those things that's very, it's interesting because you still call him Mr. Stewart, but also that you had that difficult experience to start out school, and you hear the cliche, the talk like, oh, but if you just believe in kids and you give them the opportunity, or you give them the trust, then they'll reward you and they'll appreciate it. They'll sense it, they understand, and it really does ring true. I mean, your example is just one of millions probably out there that
Mm-hmm.
one teacher can make a big difference. So,
Totally.
so you followed Mr. Stewart. You followed him from 11th grade through into teacher preparation and into the school where he worked. So talk about kind of the first day, like you walked in the classroom. So I've talked about this before, and I've definitely written about it. Where I walked in the classroom and the door shut, and I was mortified because I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. Like I did, but at the same time, as soon as I felt like that was the feeling I had, even though I knew, and I know that other people are like had this like wonderful moment. Like this is the culmination of all the things they've been trying to do for their whole life, and with me, it was just like I closed the door and I'm like, oh, the kids are mine now. What do I do? It's kind of like, what was that like when you the first day, the first, the beginning of your school experiences?
So my first teaching experience was really amazing because I had gotten qualified in ESL and was able to teach a really small class, really, really high needs in terms of language. But with an ESL class, you see these incredible strides in them. Like they just flourish, right? So every day was a new awakening. I had a young boy who at the time, and this was 23 years ago, I distinctly remember he came here because his city was bombed back home. And we went on a field trip down to a subway, on the subway. And he had never been on a subway before, and he had never been in our city before. And so that was such an incredibly rewarding experience. And I thought, oh, it's everything that I ever imagined. And then the next, I guess the second part of that is that I walked into a 10 applied English class, and I was, I guess, just subbing for a little while. And that class decided that they were going to be barnyard animals. So they just started making barnyard animal noises.
Yeah, literally animals. Yeah, no,
Literally. And
kids
I
have
was
not changed. If it
beside
makes you feel any better.
myself. I didn't know what to do. So I sat there and I'm like, nothing has prepared me for this moment. Like here I was thinking, I had my first placement with these students in ESL. I mean, I still keep in contact with them. It was amazing. And now I have this class I'm supposed to teach English to, actual English to, which I thought I was equipped to do. And they're making barnyard animal noises. And it took a super, super long time. I don't even remember what I did. I think I just survived it because they were quite horrible to me. I was young. There were a couple students in that class who were only a couple years older than me because I had just graduated. So I somehow miraculously survived, probably because I had that positive experience first. And I knew, it'll get better. And eventually it did.
So when you were having this horrific experience, did you reach out to people, or were you just like, I'm not telling anybody about this. We're just going to get through?
I was embarrassed. I didn't tell anybody. I was like, and I even tell very few people now. I can't believe I'm admitting it on a podcast, Brian.
Okay.
But it's only you.
No one's nobody's listening to this.
It was mortifying, right? It was absolutely mortifying. And at the time I didn't know enough to reach out to people in my department. I just figured, I need to be able to figure this out and figure it out on my own, which I realize now is probably the dumbest thing I could have done. And not that I didn't reach out to people and just say, hey, so what are some of your strategy? But something I learned about strategies, I mean, you can talk to lots of people about what works for them, but it won't necessarily work for you. And with those kids, what worked for them was them seeing that, okay, I'm not going anywhere. And then them realizing that I'm genuine, right? Like I'm there because I care about my subject and I care about them. And then I think when they started to realize that, they came around. So I kind of learned the hard way, I think.
Yeah, and that's one of those themes I heard from almost everybody I talk to. It's very few people when they're first starting out feel comfortable admitting that they're having a huge problem. I know I had big problems my first year, and I just I followed the advice that I got from everybody, which was keep your door closed and your head down and keep on
Yeah.
teaching, and you'll get through it, and everybody will, but I didn't want them to know. I didn't want them to know that I didn't know. I didn't want them to know that it wasn't going well. Because when the kids left the classroom, it looked fantastic. But the second they came back in, it was like there were times when it was like beyond my control, I would say.
Well, it makes you think, right? Like what, when new teachers come in, like, are we saying, hey, teaching is really hard at first. What can I do to help you or support you? And and even sharing some of our stories with them so they realize it's kind of normal when you first start, right? You almost think like, are we setting them up for failure in some ways? Are we not being open enough or empathetic enough, or even just, quiet enough to listen to, maybe some of the concerns they do have,
Oh yeah. I think that what I find most is that you see all the great stuff, you see the people talk about the good things that they do.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to talk about the struggle. Nobody wants to talk about the difficulty that they've had. And while the great stuff that comes out of it, obviously, years later you've, come to a place where you're doing quite well in your career, and you're very comfortable with what you do. And not to say that you're not still learning and growing, but you know what you're doing. And when you're presented with those things, you can figure out how to attack them, or you can figure out who to talk to make them better. So even the greatest success, we have that. We all been in those positions where we don't know what to do or things are difficult, and I think that's normal for us and for teachers in general. And because we see the fancy things, the shiny gold plating we put on the outside of everything, we really end up with this culture where new people don't know. And it's not something you talk a whole lot about in teacher prep. I think it's something that gets kind of glossed over. They talk about lots of other things, but they don't talk about the failures and the disasters and the times when you're dust and you just have to stop.
I wonder if it's unique to teaching, though. I bet you there's that in every job. So, how much do we address some of those things? And I guess that's why I really like the notion of the growth mindset, right? Because when we start to talk with kids about, failure and effort and all and what that means to your learning journey, then they could take that with them to whatever job, because I suspect it must be the same in different jobs as well, right?
I'm sure there's that aspect of it. But one of the things I've noticed, and I know there are other jobs that'll be like this, but teaching seems to be so isolating because you have your own space and you get to close your door and do your thing.
True.
And while people have always used to come and say, "Hey, if you need anything, come stop by and see me," you never stop by to see them. You're so buried in it that you don't actually get yourself out to go and check with them. So you end up going in your room and you close your door and you do your thing, and all of a sudden it's 6 months in, and either you figured it out or you didn't figure it out, and you're getting ready to head for the door. And so I just want to see that change for me. It's difficult. So you went through this difficult period. Obviously, you've come out on the other side. Was there a point where you thought to yourself, I got this. Like, I know what I'm doing. Like, I can handle this. So that if something, was there a moment, was there a year where things felt like they actually clicked, or was it just kind of you just gradually get better?
I think I've always been a super, super reflective person, so that even when I had those I got this moments, I always seem to think, but this is what I could do next time. I know that there was, so, even with my mentor, he was very, very, very traditional. And some of the things that I started to do were very, very unorthodox. And he was great in terms of giving me rein to experiment, and I could pick whatever book I wanted and I could do book clubs, but it had to be when I was teaching a class on my own. And then when I was teaching the same class as other teachers. So there were some of us teaching a grade 9 academic English, for example. We sort of, the expectation was that you were consistent, AKA you had to do the same as everybody else, right? And so where I really felt like I flourished was when I had my own class. So I started to teach AP because I knew that there would only be one section and I would get it. Or I would teach the grade 10 applied class because I know nobody wanted to teach that. And there would be one section and I would get it. And that's where I flourished, where I could experiment, where I could do really different things. And no one got mad at me. And I didn't have to worry about having the same content on the exam as everyone else because I got to make up my own exam. So that for me, that's where I really, really flourished. And where I felt stifled was where I couldn't get, I guess, a lot of others to. And in some ways, I guess I had been a little bit traditional too. So there was some unlearning that I had to do when I realized like that wasn't working for my students. So I don't know, that might have been the long answer to.
No, it makes sense though, because when you had the opportunity to actually make it yourself, make it your own, and also that piece where you just mentioned at the end that you were noticing what was and wasn't working for your kids. I think that's actually a lot harder than we make it sound. Talking about what's good for kids and what's best for kids, but we don't really noticing what works and how it works and how to make subtle changes in those things to pull more of those kids that are missing out is really difficult.
But it really is, for me, it became about, like really asking for feedback every time and really asking the kids. So I remember, and this was like 11 years ago, we talk about metacognition now, but I remember because it was part of my English strand, asking kids, where do you think you are? What do you think you're doing well here? And what do you need to improve on? And how can I help you? And it was like such a simple thing. And that's what I presented at parent-teacher interviews. And I remember it was the most successful parent-teacher interview because the kid had created it. I really got to understand who the kid was as a result. And it was like, that was the aha, right? And so then I was like, you know what? There's something to this, asking kids, involving them. And so when you do that, it's actually not as hard to do that kind of personalization, right? To see where they're at, where the different people are. Like, can you always move them from point A to point B at this, as much as you would like to? I would say lots of obstacles for that. But getting a sense of your kid and their needs and their strengths and what you can do to help them, I think it's easier than we think if we involve our kids in the process.
That's a great point. And I think that as a new teacher, it's a lot harder to feel comfortable asking anybody for feedback, let alone the kids. I mean, that's almost, that could be terrifying, especially when you're working with high school kids who could just rip you to shreds and wait a minute, I shouldn't have asked that question. But yeah.
I don't know, but high school kids appreciate that too, though. Like, I think that we need to develop a culture where everybody feels comfortable asking for feedback, right? So that whether you're a new teacher or a veteran teacher, because that can be scary too. I've been doing this for 10 years and now you're telling me I'm not doing it right. But like to really build that culture so that a new teacher does feel comfortable. Maybe I'm just because I'm veteran and I think it's easier than
but it is something that everybody should feel comfortable with. Yeah. But it's not something that, there are still times when I think about getting feedback and I'm like, well, all right, I'm going to get this feedback and I'm going to figure out how it fits. But I'm a little concerned about what they're going to say.
Yeah. First, I'm going to cry and then I'm going to reflect. Yes. Yeah.
I was just cutting onions, I swear. But those are the things that we miss a lot. And I know that like over time, those are the things that I feel that you get your expert teachers, your master teachers, they are they're the ones who are ready to take that on, and say, all right, this is the feedback. And sometimes you get feedback and you think, oh, that was a complete waste of time. I got nothing from that. But at least you can reflect on, well, why did this person see that?
Mm-hmm.
Why did they get that?
Mm-hmm.
And you end up with that. The ability to reflect is just crucial to getting better at anything. So time goes on, you've kind of got yourself in a position where you know what you're doing, teaching English, and somehow, some way, you become a teacher librarian. So how
No.
did you decide to make the shift there? I mean, was it just something that happened, or?
No, I was before I was a teacher librarian, I worked at a district level position for 6 years, and that for me was I came to a point where I was looking at teaching full-time English and only having like two of the courses that I could teach. The other ones I would have been lock, stock, and barrel with others, and I couldn't even think about that. So I had applied for a program resource teacher position, just because it was a leadership role and I didn't think I wanted to become a principal. And I found myself working at a district level in like a really small team, and then part of a 21C team. So we were teaching teachers about rolling out iPads and Google Apps for Education. And I found myself going, like I'm not ready for this. So in 2011, which coincided with me becoming a district leader, I got on Twitter, and thank goodness, because the PLN, that really transformed my learning. And I realized I'm not alone in doing these wacky, crazy things in my classroom. There are others like me. And more than anything, I learned so much, and then I was able to take that learning and help teachers in my role in my district. But because I did that for 6 years, I missed kids, and so that's when I decided I wanted to be a teacher librarian. So I've actually only just begun being a teacher librarian. It's a very new role for me.
Very nice. So would you say that some of those times, that the times between teaching English and making your way to teacher librarian, were some of the more difficult times in your career, or
I
just?
would say highs and lows, some of the most incredible times, right? Like being able to, we had an initiative where all 108 of our schools were involved. We had teams from all 8 schools. It was the hardest work I'd ever done, but also the most rewarding, to see these teams move forward with their learning. And then by year 3 of the initiative, so many of the teachers that had begun as learners in the initiative were actually facilitating learning. So we had really built capacity. So that was super, super, super exciting. The lows really came with, whenever you're in a district level position, I mean, there were very few of us to help support lots of people. And then, your ideologies sometimes, don't exactly mesh with some of the established norms or routines or red tape that might be there.
I can't imagine how that could happen.
Yeah. And I mean, and it was a really supportive environment too, right? But there's definitely a little bit of that everywhere. So
Absolutely. Yeah. So all through all these years, all this time later, you still are excited to get up and go to work, and you're still excited to share the things that you learn and things that you know. So what is it that drives you to do that? What gets you excited to still be teaching?
So it's funny. So when I stopped being excited about my job at the district level, I knew I needed to leave. And it was the same with teaching. When I stopped getting excited about what I was doing, I knew I had to change my roles. So what gets me excited is learning new things. I love, love, love to learn. And I love to share what I learn. I really do. I'm happiest when someone shows me something and then then I can show them something and we geek out about how cool that was. That drives me. And lately I've been so blessed and honored to be able to present at various conferences and work with, like I did a keynote for 2,000 students, and then I've been with administrators, and I was just at FETC, and that, like, sharing my experiences and inspiring others with some of the things that I truly am passionate and believe in, it's exhilarating to me. It's a total high. I love it. I love it.
You can hear the passion in your voice while you're talking about that, so it's clear how much that comes across. So let's talk about that. You've been doing an awful lot of sharing lately, and it's comes, I think, on the back of your book, which, by the way, is fantastic. To anybody who's listening, if you haven't read Jennifer's book, Social Media, it is absolutely wonderful. Really good stuff in there. There's even some blurb about a project that I think is pretty interesting, but there's way more interesting things in there than that. So by all means, check it out. And
shout out to Brian Costello. Thank you.
Who just drops their own shout outs in the middle of their own, but
no, I love it.
So what inspired you to do that? I mean, what inspired you to write, and what inspired you to write about the topic of students and leading in social media?
Okay. So, and first of all, thank you for your kind words. Honestly, I think it's just part of my personality that when I truly believe something, I feel like everybody needs to know about it. Like I want to shout it from the rooftops. And so George Curls came to my district, and in the evening, when he did a parent session, he started to talk about the concept of digital leadership, and in particular, talking about student leaders. And that was an aha moment for me, because shortly before that, my daughter had been asked at a job interview, what social media are you on? And what will I learn about you if I go there? And I realized that though I was helping teachers to become connected educators, we were, and there's an incredible community of sharing among teachers. Very few of us are actually empowering students in that role. So we take pictures of our kids and celebrate them. And I think that's fantastic. We're telling our story. But at some point, what about the kids? And I was seeing such right? I was seeing such a discrepancy between kids who had adult mentors in their lives who were helping them to, make connections on social media, leverage it, understand how online communities work, and then making sure that they're safe, but also that whatever passions they have could be tapped into through different online communities. And there's so many examples, but I even think of this young Gabe Howard and how his mom Speary had sort of gotten him interested in some of the game chats, and he just flourished from there. And there's so many examples of that, and yet so many examples of kids who are just not understanding not just the power of it, but the impact that doing really silly things can be on them and their futures. And and I was seeing kids being change makers online and in real life, and so that I just felt like I needed to share their stories, and I didn't want to write their stories, which is why the book has student vignettes, because I wanted them to share their stories, and I wanted to highlight them and celebrate them, because I feel like we don't do enough of that. Kids are on social media looking up to a lot of celebrities, and some of them are great. But I think we can use a lot of really good role models out there. So that's really the motivation behind the book.
Absolutely. And I love that part about it, because that's one of those things that I've stressed with the kids that I work with right away. I mean, they're 7th and 8th graders, and I talk to them about social media, and I talk to them about the internet, and talk about all the they get all the negative stuff about the internet, and you think to yourself, well, so I have these kids and they talk about social media, and they're like, well, social media is bad. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, well, it's a place where you can cause problems for yourself. I said, sure, but it's also a place where great things can happen for you. said, I have all these opportunities that I've developed because of the people that I've met, the relationships that I've built. So it's a matter of how you use it, not necessarily that you use it. And to show them examples of actual kids whose quality use of social media, that just it has changed things for them. That is such an eye opener for them, that it's not just this, it's not just the YouTubers they like to follow, or the celebrities that they see. It's real people making real genuine connections, and the negative things that you find all the time that are blasted out on TV and everywhere else, that's not the whole story. So it's just wonderful to see those kids' stories there.
Thank you. One of the most tragic, I think, stories is the story I tell at the end, which is about Charlotte. And she's the daughter of my friend, and like really just apathetic, not enjoying school, disengaged. And she creates this website. And, she reaches out and gets people to contribute titles of books that you should read. And she's so excited about it. And she brings it into school. And her teacher says, that's nice. And her teacher librarian doesn't even embrace it. But the worst of it is that her peers started to say things like, oh, your mother must not love you if she lets you go on the internet. And I'm like, what? So she's now like, her mom was super, super supportive and opened up this opportunity. She was so excited about the opportunity, and she came home devastated. And I think, what are we doing if our message is, I'm not making you go on the internet because I love you? Like, what is that? So definitely the fear narrative. I mean, like, we need our kids to be safe, of course, but I think there are so many more positive ways that we can keep our kids safe online.
Absolutely. So, I appreciate it so much. And it's one of the things I love about the book, is that it puts out that the positive message, the positive piece of social media, that kids can make a difference, that they can make a difference now. It doesn't have to be that piece where we tell kids that someday in the future, this is going to matter for you, and that you can do blah, blah, blah. And I keep telling my kids, if you really want to do something about anything, do it. You can do it. You just need to figure out who can help you do the whatever the quote adult stuff is that needs to get done, the paperwork, the T's and I's that need to be taken care of. And I love it. So, I can't say enough good things about that message. It's just fantastic.
Thank you.
So I have kept you up way too late. So I'm going to ask, and this was just one kind of final piece, one question, is what, if you were to give someone start at any point in their teaching career advice, doesn't matter if they're starting out or if they're at any point in their career, someone, if they needed advice and you were to give them one piece of advice, the best piece of advice for you that you ever got that maybe helped you the most, or even that you thought of now that makes you think, okay, if I had known this before, it would have been perfect, what would you say that is?
Definitely create for yourself a PLN, a personal learning network. And that could be and should be a combination of people in your building, but also people outside of your building via social media, because you sometimes get, and I met through EduMatch, and hearing the perspective of others who are outside of your building sometimes can make all the difference. So that would be my advice.
So wonderful. Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually one of the things that I talk about very specifically in my book, is developing your mentors and the people you can go to in and outside of your school. That you need people in your school. It's great to have people outside of your school. And I always had lots of people outside of my school once I figured out how to do that. But I didn't have very many people inside my school, because I was in a really small school and I was the weird one who was doing all the different things. So, but yeah, that's so important to have a diverse group of people to grow with and learn from, and also ask for help. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. I can't wait for your book. That's awesome. It's going to be good.
I'm crawling toward the finish line. but really, really excited. It's terrible.
I doubt it.
It's been with the new baby and everything. It's definitely taking me a lot longer than I had originally planned to write, but I'm super excited to work with Sarah Thomas and EduMatch. I just think that her message and my message just fit so well together, and I'm excited about it. So yeah,
Love Sarah.
absolutely. So thank you so much, Jennifer, for joining me and sharing things that you weren't planning on telling people about the podcast.
Jeez.
I'm hoping that's like the hallmark of this whole podcast, is that people come on and they tell things to everyone in the world that they wouldn't necessarily tell to anybody. But
All
I really
right.
do appreciate it. And this has been an excellent, a wonderful journey. And I hope that all of you out there enjoy Jennifer's story, and you also check out her book, Social Lydia. And thanks so much again to Jennifer Casa Todd, my guest this evening, and to all of you who are out there listening to the Teacher's Journey podcast. We'll catch you on the next journey.